On April 27, a man living near the city of Myrtle Beach went fishing on the Lumber River in the state park of the same name. It was a place he often visited because of its seclusion and peace. Unlike other popular recreational areas, Lumber River State Park offered silence, the opportunity to focus on nature, and a minimal presence of outsiders. The fishermen knew that such places were perfect for a break from the hustle and bustle of the city. On this day, the man settled down on the bank and chose a spot with dense vegetation. He prepared his equipment and began to enjoy the solitude, but soon his attention was drawn to a sound atypical for the surroundings. It was the muffled crying of a woman. It was not loud or panicked, but rather desperate and fitful. The sound came from the other side of the river, but the dense vegetation made it difficult to make out the source. The fisherman became suspicious, but decided not to intervene immediately so as not to violate privacy, and assumed that someone was just going through a difficult moment alone. A few minutes passed, the crying stopped. The man relaxed a little and dismissed what had happened as a random occurrence. He went back to fishing, but soon he heard a sharp sound that could not be confused with anything else. It was a gunshot. The sound immediately made him alert. The fisherman felt obliged to check what had happened and decided to approach the spot where the sounds came from. He covered about 200 m and waded through the dense vegetation until he came to a small spot on the bank. There, an unusual sight presented itself to him. A backpack lay on the ground, sunglasses and a mobile phone lay nearby. There were no people to be seen nearby. He examined the items but saw no signs of a struggle or blood. This increased his disquiet. The man decided to open the backpack in the hope of finding clues to the owner. Inside, he found a wallet with documents, cash, credit cards, small items, and a small Bible. What he found offered no clear explanation for what had happened. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, he immediately called the police. The police arrived about an hour later. After inspecting the site, they began to comb the area. Later in the day, another call came in from a park visitor who had come across something even more disturbing. Myrtle Beach on the Atlantic coast in South Carolina is known as a popular tourist destination. About 35,000 people live in the city. In the summer season, however, this number rises due to the large influx of vacationers. In addition to its tourist appeal, Myrtle Beach is also home to many churches that play an important role in the local community. Among them, the Solid Rock Church in the center of the city stands out. It was founded as a spiritual center for parishioners seeking a deep religious experience and support in difficult life situations. Solid Rock quickly made a name for itself by actively engaging with the local community and offering both traditional worship services and educational and sports activities for young people. Pastor John Paul Miller plays a key role in Solid Rock's activities. He was appointed in 2009 and has a background in religious work. John Paul was known for his charismatic manner and his active involvement in the lives of his parishioners. He was married to a woman named Allison, with whom he raised 3 children together and a child from a previous marriage. The Miller family lived in a house next to the church. That brought them even closer to the congregation. One of the new families that joined Solid Rock in the same year was the Francis family. The parents Angelita and Michael moved to Myrtle Beach together with their 2 daughters Mica and Sierra and chose this church to attend. For 14-year-old Mica, the church quickly became a place where she made new friends and actively participated in youth activities. She took part in a group organized by Pastor John Paul himself, which allowed her to become part of the local community. Mica's older sister Sierra was also active in Solid Rock. Her role, however, was less and less visible. Mica, on the other hand, stood out for her enthusiasm and her faith, which did not go unnoticed. Her involvement in church affairs opened up the opportunity for her to connect with other young parishioners. One of these young men was Jeremy, who participated in the same activities as Mica. Their relationship developed gradually, and after a few years, the young couple decided to marry. Their union seemed ideal, common interests in church activities and support from both families. But this union, which became part of the church history, was later to be at the center of complex events that changed the lives of everyone involved. The wedding took place in the church itself. John Paul performed the ceremony personally, underlining its importance for the congregation. The event was a real celebration that brought many parishioners together. The parents on both sides expressed their pride in the young couple and saw in their marriage the embodiment of the ideals of family and spiritual unity. At this time, Mica and Jeremy were full of hope for a shared future based on common goals and faith. After the wedding, Mica and Jeremy's lives became even more closely interwoven with the work of the church. Mica helped with administrative tasks, took care of paperwork and event management, while Jeremy focused on the youth sports programs. He led the American football team and was also involved in the development of other activities for young people. Through these tasks, they spent a lot of time together, and that seemed to be the perfect continuation of their marriage. But just a few months after the wedding, the first signs of strain in their relationship appeared. The frequent daily routines together, packed with responsibility, made Mica tired. And unlike the time before the wedding, when they could pay more attention to each other, their lives now revolved around work. Jeremy, absorbed in his role, spent less and less time supporting Mica emotionally, which increased her feeling of isolation. Another factor that affected their relationship was Mica's close relationship with other church members, including the pastor's wife Allison. During her work in the administrative office, Mica gradually took on more responsibility and became an integral part of the team. This led to her professional life beginning to overlap with her private life, leading to additional tensions in her marriage. Although their marriage looked good on the outside, internal problems were piling up. The couple did not share their difficulties with others in order to maintain the appearance of harmony. Nevertheless, the cracks in the relationship became visible to the people closest to them. These first signs of discord would later form the basis for more serious problems that would influence their fate. After a few months in administration, Mica was transferred to a new position and became the personal secretary of Pastor John Paul Miller. This decision was due to her organizational talent and her desire to take on more responsibility in church activities. The move to this position meant that she worked closely with John Paul, which meant frequent personal meetings and regular communication as part of her duties. With the start of her new task, Mica spent a lot of time by the pastor's side. John Paul appreciated her diligence and her interest in the affairs of the church. Despite their age difference of more than 10 years, their communication gradually went beyond the workplace. At first, there were discussions about personal views on life and faith. Later, they became more open conversations. This interaction led to a close emotional bond between them, which led to tensions in their family life. In 2016, the situation changed dramatically. John Paul's wife Allison came home unexpectedly earlier than usual and caught her husband in a compromising situation with Mica. This incident was the beginning of a major conflict in the Miller household. Allison demanded an explanation and a confrontation ensued between the spouses. When Allison learned of the incident, she also decided to inform Jeremy, Mica's husband. The consequences of this event affected not only both families but also the church congregation. Although the parties agreed to remain silent about the details of what had happened, rumors about the affair began to spread in the community. Church staff and people close to the family noticed changes in the behavior of John Paul and Mica, as well as increasing tensions between them and their spouses. Despite attempts to maintain the appearance of normality, the conflict became increasingly apparent. Allison and Jeremy filed for divorce almost simultaneously. The process was difficult and painful for both parties. Allison left the church and moved with her children to another city to start a new life, far away from the events that had led to the failure of her marriage. Jeremy, for his part, ended his involvement in church activities and distanced himself completely from Solid Rock. A few months after the divorce proceedings were concluded, John Paul and Mica officially announced their relationship. They openly stated that they were now a couple, which triggered a new wave of discussions in the community. This was a heavy blow for many parishioners. The pastor, who had previously preached the values of family loyalty, found himself involved in a scandal that undermined his reputation and the trust of some parishioners. In 2017, a year after their relationship began, John Paul Miller and Mica officially married. The wedding took place in the Solid Rock Church, where John Paul continued to serve as pastor despite previous scandals. Close friends, family members, and parishioners attended the ceremony. The event was an attempt to restore the pastor's credibility and mitigate the negative impression in the community following the revelation of his affair with Mica. For Mica, this event meant not only a new chapter in her personal life, but also greater responsibility within the church. She officially became the pastor's wife, which automatically gave her the role of mentor and organizer in the congregation. Many parishioners saw this step as a chance to renew and strengthen the church, as well as an opportunity for John Paul to begin a new chapter without the mistakes of the past. Immediately after the wedding, Mica took on new duties at Solid Rock. In addition to administrative work, she actively participated in church programs and focused on organizing mission trips and charity events. One of her most important projects was trips to Kenya. With the help of donations, Mica organized the construction of schools where children were offered basic educational opportunities, including English and mathematics. In addition to this work, Mica began leading courses and workshops in the church itself. Her lectures covered the topics of family values, personal faith, and overcoming adversity. A particularly important topic for her was dealing with domestic violence. She shared her views on this topic publicly, which attracted not only the attention of the congregation, but also a wide audience on social media. She actively posted on her page about the importance of respectful relationships and the need to support victims of violence. Mica's commitment to these projects gradually restored John Paul's reputation. Although many in the community still criticized the pastor for his past behavior, his wife's activism helped create the image of a new, more sustainable and progressive church. Mica was a key figure for Solid Rock. Her initiatives aimed to inspire young people and involve them in religious and social life. Despite Mica's efforts to maintain a family and working relationship with John Paul, tensions in their marriage began to grow. Over time, it became clear that their union, which was originally based on mutual understanding, was in a serious crisis. One of the first signs of the deterioration of their relationship was frequent arguments caused by financial control. John Paul took complete control of the family bank accounts and restricted Mica's access to funds. He claimed he was doing this to protect their joint finances. For Mica, however, this was an additional source of stress. She felt deprived of her autonomy and independence, especially given her active role in the church and in mission projects. She also noticed that her contact with friends and family was becoming increasingly restricted. John Paul confronted her about her frequent visits to her family and accused her of interfering too much in matters that did not concern their marriage. He also began to monitor her phone calls and correspondence, so that Mica felt constantly watched. Added to the psychological manipulation were threats. Mica told her relatives that John Paul used her past mistakes and weaknesses as leverage. One of the most painful examples was the mention of personal photos that he threatened to publish if she tried to leave the family. These methods increased her fear and uncertainty about the possibility of ending the relationship. Against this background, Mica made attempts to escape her husband's control. She turned to her sister Sierra and informed her of her intention to divorce. Together, they visited a lawyer who began preparing the documents. At this stage, however, Mica encountered another obstacle. After the meeting with the lawyer, John Paul learned of her plans, which led to another scandal. He categorically refused to discuss the terms of the divorce and stated that their marriage must be preserved for the sake of the church's reputation. Since she refused to speak openly about it, Mica temporarily moved to her family to escape her husband's pressure. This time gave her a break from the tension and the opportunity to realize how serious the situation had become. However, after another conversation in which he promised to change his behavior, she soon returned to John Paul. Despite these promises, the problems continued. One of the most striking incidents reflecting the escalation of their conflict was the incident with Mica's car. She went to the police after discovering that all four tires of her car had been slashed, and a GPS tracker was located under the chassis. She was convinced that John Paul was responsible. Although no direct evidence of his involvement was found, his sudden appearance at the car repair shop only reinforced her suspicion. One day, John Paul insisted that Mica be admitted to a hospital because her behavior had become unpredictable. A doctor subsequently diagnosed a mental disorder and recommended treatment. Mica, on the other hand, argued that her recent actions served to defend her own freedom and were not the result of instability. After her discharge, she contacted the police, claiming John Paul had tried to use her hospitalization to deprive her of her autonomy. Mica's attempts to end the marriage met with serious obstacles. Despite the efforts of her family and her lawyer, the divorce process dragged on. John Paul continued to maintain control over her life, which made her situation even worse. April 27, 2024 was a turning point in this story. On this day, Mica left her house without informing her family or friends of her intentions. The subsequent events, reconstructed using surveillance images, phone records, and recovered evidence, revealed the sequence of actions that led to her death. The surveillance footage confirmed that Mica arrived at the gun store that morning. She appeared calm and confident, which was noted by the store employees. She chatted casually with the salesperson during the purchase and then left the store with a small case containing a handgun. The receipts confirmed that the gun had been purchased legally and paid for by her personally. She then drove toward Lumber River State Park. Her vehicle was recorded by surveillance cameras along the highway leading to this location. Data from her mobile phone showed that Mica performed several searches related to remote locations and parks before selecting a specific destination. This confirms that her actions were planned in advance. When Mica reached the park, she left her car in the parking lot and walked to the river. A short time later, she called emergency services from the riverbank. During the call, she stated that she was leaving the world voluntarily and asked that information about her location be passed on to relatives. A recording of the call, later made available by the police, confirmed the seriousness of her intentions. There was sadness in her voice, but no obvious signs of panic. Less than an hour after the call, a passerby fishing nearby heard shots. When police arrived at the scene, they found Mica's body on the riverbank and her belongings nearby, including a backpack with documents, a phone, a wallet, and a small Bible. The weapon used to fire the shot was found nearby in the water. An examination revealed that there were no fingerprints on the weapon. Based on the evidence, investigators concluded that the shot was fired by Mica herself. It was also confirmed that she had driven to the scene alone and that no persons were following her on the surveillance footage. In the official police report, the cause of death was listed as the intentional termination of one's own life. However, this conclusion raised questions from her family, who claimed that Mica showed no signs of depression and led an active lifestyle. They also pointed out that a few days before her death, she had tried to finalize her divorce proceedings, which they believed indicated that she wanted to start a new life. Despite the official explanation from law enforcement, Mica's tragic death caused a great public outcry and gave rise to numerous theories about the possible causes of the incident. The family's main argument was the information Mica shared with her sister shortly before her death. She spoke of pressure and manipulation by her husband John Paul. According to Sierra, Mica even warned that John Paul would be held responsible if anything happened to her. These words were substantiated by her diary, which was found in her apartment after her death. The diary contained detailed entries about her complicated relationship with John Paul. Mica spoke of emotional and psychological abuse, constant control, and threats. She also pointed out that John Paul was prone to manipulation, often using her past mistakes against her and threatening to reveal personal information if she decided to leave him. Furthermore, the family and the community pointed to the uncovered information about John Paul, including his possible relationships with other women in the church and financial irregularities. Some parishioners claimed that the pastor may have embezzled funds he had collected for missions and used them for personal enrichment. This triggered numerous rumors and conspiracy theories. The alleged motives of John Paul were actively discussed on social media and media channels. His past actions, such as using a GPS tracker to spy on Mica and possibly pressuring her by threatening to publish personal photos, intensified the criticism of him. Some internet users accused him of indirectly causing the tragedy, while others put forward more radical theories about a staged crime. Although there was no direct evidence, the allegations against John Paul attracted the attention of the police and the public. These events made him the center of public condemnation, even though officials found no grounds for charges against him. The influence of Mica's family and the details of her life that came to light further fueled interest in the case and created an atmosphere of tension and mistrust. After Mica's tragic death, the police immediately launched an investigation to clarify the full circumstances of the incident. However, it soon became clear that it would be difficult for local law enforcement to handle the case alone due to the high publicity, pressure from Mica's family, and the numerous allegations against John Paul. The FBI was brought into the investigation. Their involvement was due not only to the increasing complexity of the case, but also to the need for an objective approach in investigating all aspects. A key phase of the investigation was the examination of the circumstances of the purchase of the weapon found near Mica's body. Investigators confirmed that the weapon was purchased by her personally on the day of her death, which was confirmed by video recordings and financial transactions. No traces were found indicating the involvement of other persons in this process. Also, the camera recordings in the parking lot of Lumber River State Park showed no suspicious vehicles or persons who could have followed her. However, the investigation went beyond confirming that Mica took her own life. In the wake of the public allegations against John Paul, the FBI began to investigate his past in detail, including his financial activities and his interactions with church members. There was evidence of possible financial irregularities. Although there were no formal charges, these facts increased suspicion against John Paul and led to further investigations. One of the most discussed topics was John Paul's possible involvement in Mica's deteriorating psycho-emotional state. Although the diary entries did not justify criminal prosecution, they raised doubts that John Paul's actions did not play a role in the tragic outcome. The investigation also raised questions about John Paul's relationships with other women in the congregation, as well as his reputation in the community. Some witnesses reported inappropriate behavior by the pastor that could have negatively affected those around him. However, there is not enough evidence for any of these allegations to hold him accountable. Until further notice, John Paul remains formally at large, although his standing in the church community has been severely shaken. He has been suspended from his position as pastor, but according to local sources, continues to receive payments from the church budget. The decision triggered mixed reactions among parishioners. Some demanded a complete separation from him, others defended him with the argument that the allegations were not proven. This tragic story also affected the Solid Rock Church itself. The response to Mica's case undermined the credibility of the church leadership, triggered a mass exodus of parishioners, and called into question the effectiveness of internal structures. Many people who had previously participated actively in the life of the church publicly expressed their disappointment and stopped attending events. At the time of the conclusion of the investigation, many questions remain unanswered. The most important concerns the extent of John Paul's influence on his wife's condition and his possible responsibility for what happened. While law enforcement finds no grounds for charges, the public continues to follow the development of events and discuss new versions and details. This story remains painful for everyone involved and reminds us of how destructive hidden conflicts and injustices can be. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself.